Video number 2. I have been working with figuring out what is the best camera angle. Actually, I've moved in the past year, and so the setup that I used to have, I do not have anymore. So I got a suggestion rather, last video, just that I place the camera so that you can see the bridge of my cello more easily, which I totally agree with. I debated even posting the last video just because I knew it was about the bow and you couldn't really see my bow much, but I decided to post it and we're just gonna try this setup. I don't think that you can see my head very well, but whatever, I'm learning. I have a few things on my to-do list today, so this is one of them, so we're working on that this morning. Cello tip number 2. I have been working on this for as long as I have been playing the cello, and I will be working on this for as long as I play the cello, which will hopefully be my entire life. I recently read a study, which if you're interested in hearing more, let me know. I just wrote a paper on it actually, and it was a study done in Canada about cello learning and sort of early predictors of success for cello learning. So they actually scanned participants' brain prior to the study, and then 13 participants had cello instruction twice a week for 4 weeks, and then they scanned the participant's brain at 1 week and at 4 weeks and looked at the changes in the brain. It's very fascinating. This is something that I love. I love the field of music and neuroscience, and I am a music therapist by trade, so. But all that to say, one of the reasons I believe why they used the cello in their study was because it is an instrument that requires fast pitch correction. They called it online pitch correction. So for example, if I go to play a note and it's sharp, if I was playing that live, I may adjust it. And I believe that is a closer, it's a G. Oh yes, but also the very first thing I was going to say is something that's very important for intonation, and something that I would suggest is tuning your cello every time you play, before every time you practice, because even if your strings change slightly, which for different reasons, strings change tune sometimes, just sitting there makes that happen. I think humidity can change, of course, the wood, and so therefore it might change the pitch of the string. Before I got this cello, some of you may notice this actually is a different cello. My cello is going into the shop, and due to sort of the worldwide self-isolation that's happening right now, my cello, it's going to take a long time to get it back. So I wanted to do a review on my cello, but that will have to wait. So for the meantime, I have this really old cello that was made in France. It's a beautiful cello. It has a lot of skiffs and scuffs and all that stuff, but I think I'll do a review on this one as soon as I can find out more information about it. But what I was going to say is the person that let me use this cello for the time being, before they gave it to me, they changed a part on it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's this little thing at the bottom. Oh my goodness. This little thing. And so of course the very next time that I took it out, when I had it, it was very out of tune, and so yeah, so anyway, we're gonna do that quick. Also make sure you have good space to work, as I do not right now, and my beautiful Neumann was in my way, so because I'm going to do some recording later. my second tip, besides making sure your cello is in tune, that's number one, my second tip would be to make sure that you do rosin your strings. I sometimes tend to overdo it on the rosin, which isn't necessarily good because the rosin started eating away at my bow. And you don't want it to cover your cello all the time, so it's good to just take a dry cloth and just brush it off. Also, because I used to overdo it, I have the tendency to not use enough rosin now, and it actually makes a huge difference for my playing. So with that, let's talk about intonation. Let's talk about the left hand. So because I already mentioned that I am very fascinated in neuroscience and music, I am just incredibly fascinated with how one learns where to put their hands on the fingerboard, on the cello, because I played guitar before I played cello, and yes, it is true the cello does not have frets, and actually has no real markers for where you should put your fingers. So very quickly I learned that it's just a process of practice and drilling and muscle memory. Because I learned as an adult, I asked a cellist one time who teaches lots of kids and lots of beginner adults. I just said, how do kids do it? Like, how in the world? This is such a difficult instrument. How do they do it? And she said, well, I think she said something like, I don't think they're as hard on themselves, first of all. And then second of all, they're better at muscle memory. So for me, like immediately I tried to play a G already and it was sharp. Which it could have been because my cello was a tad out of tune, but there I was flat. So it's interesting, like even to this day, I have some issue finding notes. So if I'm to find, say like an A on the D string, I was quite flat. It might be because I haven't seriously played like a good practice just for a few days. So sometimes I just warm up by doing different sort of things that I love. Some people would just call it noodling around. Sometimes I do scales. Also not just to get the feeling of my notes on the fingerboard, but also because I have double jointed fingers and my fingers just tend to collapse and stuff, so that's part of it too. So I start nice and slow. I like to, if I'm working on intonation, of course, doing shifts over and over, which is where you go from one position to another position. That's very helpful. So like a G major scale. Obviously, I tried, the first note I played was the worst out of that whole scale, but this is just me being honest and vulnerable with you right now. I'm not cutting out my worst mistakes on this video today. So intonation is simply doing things like that. Working on intonation is doing things like that. The other thing is, I remember, and this still happens to this day, because I have always worked with instructors, there would be times that I thought I was in tune and I'd be playing something and they'd be like, oh, you're just a tad flat, and that has been super helpful. Another thing that has helped me with intonation is recording and listening back, because I wouldn't recommend it if you are easily discouraged because it can be discouraging, but it can also be very helpful. Another thing would be getting a tuner. Sometimes I do that when I'm working on songs. So you saw me pull up my tuner earlier, and I will tell you what I use. It's free, so this is not an ad, but it's called Tuner Lite. It's a chromatic tuner, so I use that for the cello as opposed to a tuner that just tunes for exact notes. Yeah. So if I'm working on a song that has some difficult shifts, so intonation to me is working at getting it right in tune. That is one of the most difficult things about the cello. That one, I was actually doing it by ear. Usually I do that when reading the music, but there's lots of shifts in it. Usually I work on that one for vibrato, which is another video that I'm going to talk about, which I am no expert on vibrato, but it is something that I've been working on for a long time now. And you'll see when I work on intonation, I often take out the vibrato, which is what I was doing there. So because sometimes when you vibrato, the thing about vibrato is that you're kind of wobbling on a note, so therefore you're kind of going in between notes. So it actually sort of covers up sometimes when you're flat. I know for singing also it can cover it up, but if I'm specifically working on intonation, I want to maybe take out the vibrato for a time. Yeah, so basically that is the good news, and the hard news is that it's really about repetition. I still struggle with intonation. I posted a video a few months back, and what I thought I mentioned that it was like from a couple years ago that I had actually had the opportunity to play an Eastman 305, and I just posted it as a review, and someone said intonation to me because I guess it was pretty bad, so which is okay. Like that's just part of learning the cello. It's much different as the study that I was talking about before, which I think I rabbit trailed from. The reason why they used a cello is because this instrument does really show who has the ability to make online pitch corrections, versus if you just play a piano key, you expect it to just sound the correct note, unless it's out of tune, of course. But a piano player doesn't necessarily have as much control over what note comes out versus a cellist. So again, I'm with you, and I am still working on intonation. I will be forever. Hopefully my head wasn't cut off this whole video, and I will see you in a couple days for my next technique.